Hello, and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our guest in studio today is returning and has studied the generational diversity issue in depth. And he's here to describe how the various generations can effectively and positively work side by side in healthcare. Our guest is Mr. Christopher Martorella, MSN, registered nurse, NEA-BC. How are you this afternoon, Chris?
I'm doing great, Neal. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for returning. When we were here in another segment, you explained to our listeners what generational diversity was. We were talking about different types of diversity, and although most of our listeners are healthcare professionals themselves, let's talk about a definition, a good solid definition of generational diversity.
Sure. Generational diversity is the diversity that's brought about in any kind of a situation when you have different generations working together. So anytime you have a group of workers, as you have a good cross-section, you may have people from the veterans, the boomers, the Xers, or the millennials.
As a person who's hired and dismissed people over the years throughout your career, what types of challenges are there when you're recruiting someone who may have been at a healthcare institution for 20 years? Now they're maybe 40, maybe 50, 55 years old, and they're coming to a new place where many of the nurses and healthcare professionals are maybe 20 years younger than them. How do you explain to a person that this is the environment that they're coming into and assure them that they're going to be supported?
That's a great question. The first thing you would have to do as a good leader would be not to assume that the person's going to enter that workforce and not have any issues. I think that the good leader would have a sense of the composition of their workforce. Understanding what the generational composition is, and then determining, how would you then work someone new into that situation? Because again, if they are someone's coming in and they're in their 50s and they're coming into a work group with all 20-somethings, let's say, they're not going to share the same worldviews. They're not going to have had the same music growing up, the same defining world events that occurred. And so they're going to be looking at the work a little bit differently. So, for instance, the example that you give is a great one because the 50-year-old is probably in the baby boomer generation or getting close to it, and they definitely have different ideas about what kinds of things motivate them, what are the kinds of work that they enjoy doing, what kinds of things are going to retain them in the workplace. So I think about, for instance, my mom and dad, who are now in their 70s, so they are retired, but they came from a generation where you went to work for a company and you stayed there for 30 years and you got a gold watch when you retired, and that was what the expectation was. Nowadays, people getting coming into the workforce, that is nowhere near an expectation for anyone. Young folks, even mid-career folks, who have had a worldview where they've witnessed downsizing, and particularly that's certainly been an issue in healthcare, right? In banking,
yes.
They came from latchkey family situations where mom and dad was not the traditional household. There was a lot of single families, so these children were perhaps raised by television instead of by two parents. So they have experienced and have undergone different things than other people in their generation. So we do see these kinds of different worldviews played out. Even when I was a new nurse, I can remember having the utmost respect for my shift supervisor. And if she came down and said, Mr. Martorella, we need somebody to work a double tonight, it wasn't, well, let me think about that. It was, yes, ma'am. I'll be happy to do that. Yeah. Nowadays, you may run into younger folks and maybe some of us older folks who have learned something from the younger folks to say, well, no, wait a minute, I have something to do this afternoon, and I want work-life balance. That's what we hear a lot from the Gen Xers, the Gen Ys, is that they recognize that they're working to live, not living to work, as a lot of our forefathers have done. And so, of course, that presents new challenges for the manager of today, right? The manager of old, if they need somebody to work overtime, they just told somebody. Now we're in healthcare working on various pieces of legislation keep coming up, not allowing mandatory overtime and other kinds of things like that, because those powers have become abused, and people don't want to work 60 hours a week. They want to do their 40 hours, they want to go home, and they want to enjoy their families or enjoy their life.
Have you noticed that there is a difference in, I guess, acceptance of the new generationally diverse workforce by either men or women, or is the acceptance and I guess the integration into those situations pretty even across the board? Because even among men and women, the experiences are so far left and right coming through the generations that surely there are some clashes and some fires that need to be put out.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and one that I would think I'm not sure what might be in the literature in terms of that, but I would think just off the cuff that women may have more of a understanding of generational diversities, perhaps because they have been one of the groups that has been left behind historically, has fought for equality in the workplace, certainly have different things going on in their lives vis-a-vis. They're the only ones that can give us children, so sometimes they leave the workforce and face some discriminations of their own when they try to return, and now they have lost seniority, or they are not seen as perhaps being as serious about work because they're taking time off for family. So I think it would be something, I would guess, my hypothesis would be that females would see generational diversity perhaps a little bit different than males might.
In your opinion, why haven't hospitals been more interested in generational diversity? My mother retired as a nurse, and she had a group of friends that ran the gamut of age groups. Why haven't hospitals historically been interested in generational diversity, or were they and just calling it something else?
I think that if they begin to understand that it is a business imperative to make sure that the generations that they are recruiting for, the workers that they are vying for, if they see that as important, then they will invest in some understanding of generational diversity and how that works against them. I think for a lot of us, we hope it's a problem that maybe if we just put our head in the sand, it will go away. But it's not going to go away, because no one's going to change their age, and these folks will continue to have 4 generations in the workplace. So I think that for those hospitals that recognize that people are their most important aspect, or their most important asset, and recognizing that we're going to be recruiting various generations, then if they see that business important, then it becomes very clear that we've got to have a workforce that gets along, that collaborates, that cooperates, and then we begin to see folks, bringing in experts to help them pull that together.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. We've been in studio talking with Christopher Martorella. Chris has served as a consultant and project manager for a wide range of engagements, including nursing and other clinical departmental operational assessments, mock accreditation surveys and accreditation recovery, workforce efficiency and strategy engagements, and so much more. It's been great having you here with us today, Christopher.
Thank you, Neal. It's great to be here.
Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm, and you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes.